Welcome and thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be exploring something that each and every one of us does, but doesn't really truly understand maybe at times just how much it influences the real world we live in, and that is to simply think. There's an old Buddhist precept that says, what you think, so you become. But how real is that? Well, why don't you take a look at your lives and see how they're going? Are you really living the life that you truly want? Are you mastering the kind of things that are necessary to get you to where you want to be? On the program today, we're going to be exploring this through a new leap in awareness simply known as quantum thinking. On the program today, we're going to be speaking with an original thinker, one of the most foremost thought leaders in our time. She has dedicated her life to being able to help people transcend their thinking to create new realities. The book is titled, Do You Quantum Think? New Thinking That Will Rock Your World. And I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program our guest, Ms. Diane Collins. Diane, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure. I was really looking forward to being with you because I know you've been reading my book, and not every host does that. So
yeah, well, you know, they usually get researchers, and then they come up with these ham-bone questions, and you can see the guest kind of sitting there in the wings like, why did I bother showing up for this? And I know this is a major ABC network and all that, but that's how it works. Now, what's really interesting is that I was at the local library, and this is how I came to discover this book in the first place. And I was doing some research on some certain things, and then this popped up, and I said, well, hey, that's kind of an interesting title here. So I looked into it, and I got a copy, and I was looking through, and I thought, wow, this is really something here. And I didn't realize that it was actually published this year. So I said, hey, what do you see about getting her on the program here? So here you are.
Great. Thank you, Dan.
Talk about an observer-created reality.
That's right. You know, and I was thinking about it because I knew that's how you discovered my book, Do You Quantum Think? And it did just was released in June of this year. And I also knew that somehow you found me through a publicist in Southern California that I had very little connection with, and yet we connected that way. Mm-hmm. So in my business, we call this a quantum occurrence, that you had an intent to make that kind of a connection, not just with me, but with the whole subject, I'm sure.
Right.
And, of course, I'm wanting to connect with people like you who understand the importance of being able to think in a new way, to quantum think, to expand the whole way we relate to life now as the world is changing at this dazzling pace. So this is what we call a quantum occurrence, to be able to connect that way through the field of intelligence. And, you know, I liked what you said at the beginning about, well, is it really real? You know, do our thought, you know, we grow up, thought creates reality. And I grew up that way, too. And I go, thought creates reality. Well, how does it do that? And if all you had to do was change your thoughts to change your life, to change the world, then why does it still look like it does?
Right.
So I really do appreciate, this is what led me to actually investigate further and led me to create the quantum think system of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Now, you, of course, said in your book that, you know, that quantum think chose you. It wasn't the other way around where you discovered it and created this. But this has really been an exploratory path for you since, as you proclaim, at the age of 4.
That's exactly right. And it's again, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I just started to investigate. Like, what is it? You know, what is life? Who are these beings walking around on the planet? You know, what are we supposed to be doing here? And then as I got older, I started to investigate philosophy and, you know, anything that had to do with thinking more about the true purpose of life and how, you know, in a very, let's say, I want to say, the word is coming to me, delicious way, thinking of, you know, we are all here with desires. So how do we get what we want?
Mm-hmm.
And so all of those questions led me to keep investigating. And what happened along the way is I realized I was always looking for a new way to see things. You know, we're talking about beyond 50.
Mm-hmm.
And I myself, I never admit it on other shows, Daniel, but I'll say it on yours. So, I'm in that baby boomer age group. And so when I was a teenage, I came across, some article about the Vietnam War. And I started thinking to myself, as I looked around, and I realized, there's some kind of a disconnect here. Why are we, as a humanity, manufacturing weapons? It's not just about any one particular country, but I'm talking about the level of consciousness of humanity as a whole. Why are we still, getting more sophisticated now about manufacturing weapons to kill each other en masse?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought to myself at that young age, there's something wrong with this picture. And what I realized is that two things is, one is that we could only really have a true shift. Obviously we're developing technologically. We have so much brilliance on the planet. It's just mind-boggling what we've been divinely born with to be able to do. But now it's time to master the mind, to master consciousness, because what science and spirituality are now converging on is the fact that it's not a matter-based creation. It's not starting with the physical and then everything comes from the brain. No,
Mm-hmm.
It's a mind-based creation. And we don't learn a thing about that in traditional education. And why not? Because, and this was my great revelation, we have been brought up, conditioned by a worldview that started in the 17th century, where the scientists said only matter is real.
Right.
Put the spirit on the side and hold the soul, as I say. So anyway, this is what led me to realize, well, we're in a quantum age. We know so much more about the way reality actually works. And I've been mentioning one of it is that it's our habits of mind, our habits of thinking, what we hold in our awareness, which in a very real sense is creating our experience of life. Our experience creates what we're resonating, what we're emanating, what we're attracting. And that in turn is literally, we could say it in quotes, manufacturing the results we get in life. So until we start to realize that it's not just one thought at a time, this was my revelation.
Mm-hmm.
It's that we're in a quantum age, but we're still using industrial age thinking. What did the industrial age say? That the universe is a machine, that it's a cause and effect, have everything in front of you. I look at how does this map on to human thinking? Well, we've become in many ways automatic and mechanical in our thinking. So it's through no personal fault or blame of anyone. This is what I like about quantum thinking, is that it's not that we're not responsible, but the thoughts that we have automatically, which I call least action pathways, the way the energy goes because it's been that route before. And a lot of these least action pathway thoughts, if you were at choice, Daniel,
mm-hmm.
you would not be choosing to have some kind of self-denigrating thought, would you?
No.
No. You wouldn't choose, being in the baby boomer age, and we realize we're in a very different time now, as all of us know. Not only are the structures, undergoing a whole restructuring is needed, but also each one of us personally are undergoing our own reevaluation, and especially in the baby boomer age. And, it's very different now. We're healthier, we're living longer, we have technology that connects us with people and our children and grandchildren and all over the world, and there are a lot of other business opportunities for us. So in a sense, it's time to interrupt those old least action pathway cultural thoughts, not even personal. They're just in the surrounding intelligent atmosphere that we're swimming in. To start to interrupt that and know how to use the faculties of mind, the main one being the power of our own consciously generated intent.
Yeah, fascinating just to even have the audience really wrap themselves around that. And to give you an example, as you brought up the industrial-aged thinking and we, the baby boomer, is that also in that industrial-aged thinking was taught to us how we were supposed to live. In an industrial age, the most productive people tend to be the youngest because they're generally the ones with a lot more vitality, strength, energy, whatever you want to call it. So it makes sense in a manufacturing world that your usefulness will deteriorate as you get older, so to speak. So then the thinking goes simply like this. Your job after you're born, and you hear this, probably in most families, is that, you go through school, you become educated, you go to college, get yourself a degree. After that, you get yourself a stable career, you raise a family, and then after that, hopefully, if you're smart enough and you've saved enough money, you can retire to the good life. Now, when you really take a look at that, there are a lot of traps in there for an individual that really don't have them take lock and stock into saying, well, wait a minute, there's got to be a heck of a lot more to this. But following just that linear path of thinking for an individual, and even this day and age, you begin to see the anxiety they feel when they haven't hit these, call them chronological benchmarks, about where they should be in life according to who.
Right, absolutely. And in the work that I do, and I work with my husband in presenting quantum thinking, we do private consulting and we have teleseminars. In fact, I have a free teleseminar that I'd like to invite your listeners to, which is called Ultimate Study Group for people who are reading the book, free twice a month. Go to my website, DianeCollins.com. Let me give a little pitch there for it. Diane with two N's, COLLINS.com, and you can sign up for the Ultimate Study Group. And what you're saying is really a brilliant distinction. I like because really you're talking about a lot of richness in what you're saying, Daniel. The entropy, and when you use, to use the metaphor, the analogy of the industrial age, of the machine age, where that is where parts wear down, where you wear out. Whereas now, what is the quantum age teaching us that's a more up-to-date and advanced knowledge is that we are multidimensional beings in an infinite possibility universe. And so and everything is alive with consciousness. In fact, as you probably know, Daniel, our thoughts have a tremendous effect on our vitality, on our health. And so when you're talking about those stages of life and that linear way of thinking, that one-dimensional. Now, one thing I want to say about this is that we don't want to. I don't want to have people, think of this as an either-or, but as an expansion in thinking. Mm-hmm. So the industrial age, which gave us the ability to analyze, to categorize, to make sense of a chaotic nature out there, it has been extremely genius and beneficial in many ways. But we've reached the limits, and particularly what you're saying here about that linear path, that we are conditioned to think, to believe that that is the only way. Now, think about it from an infinite possibility universe. And one of the, I like to give one of the practices, quantum think is actually a system of 21 distinctions in new thinking and practices for the mind and awareness that integrate those principles. So as a system, you're making a leap from the old world view of the industrial age to the new world view of the quantum age for short. So when you make that leap, one of the practices is called listening from not knowing, and it's part of the distinction success to mastery. It's called success to mastery because successes, and this is referencing what you've been talking about, success by definition is what already happened. So it's based in the past. So where that pathway, that linear, how you unfold in your life, and it may still be working for some people, but that is, even if you've been successful in it, by nature of the past, where what I'm saying is what we need today is to leap to a new state of operating, a state of mastery. Now, in the state of mastery, you look from what will work and what is best now in this situation. And in this situation, knowing that we're in not a fixed and static universe, as we've been conditioned by the industrial age to be with everything that way, but we're in a universe of energy and flux where what we bring to the observation, what we bring to our awareness in any given moment is actually shaping what we see and the future of it. So when you go to this, how do you get to operate from this mastery state? The practice is you listen from not knowing, and not knowing, think of it as one phrase, NOT-knowing. Now, we don't normally, naturally listen from not knowing. It's like, we're in a situation and our whole past comes along with us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to do this as a conscious act. You generate it consciously. And you can do this now as you're looking at your life and you're thinking, okay, I'm age 50, whatever, or older. And instead of listening to, well, I've only been able to do, this profession or have that experience or save this amount of money, if I were looking freshly, newly, from a state of mastery, from what will work and what is best for me now, what would I be creating? Because the world, the outer world that we are in, is so flush with opportunity that if we can shift our thinking, interrupt the old patterns that no longer serve us, look at it as, wow, just a least action pathway doesn't mean you're good, bad, ugly, or sublime. It just means it's a habit that you are no longer choosing. Interrupt that and create from intent, create from a place of mastering your own life now by mastering the way that you think.
Now, that all makes so much sense, Diane, and it was interesting because one of the exercises you have in your book, I started implementing it actually back as early as, I believe it was May or June when I first found your book, Do You Quantum Think? And I thought, okay, I'm going to go ahead and start doing this. And it was really quite astounding how this works because when you think about this, for instance, for the listeners out there, our thoughts have energy. And all energy will always do what it was doing before. So for the moment you get up, let's say in the morning, and you think to yourself, oh, I've got to go to this dreaded job. I can't stand my boss because he's this or she's that. Now follow that line of thinking. Now you're giving energy and life to that. And what was interesting is how I really began to start deeply putting it together in your chapter when you talk about 0-point energy. In other words, the void, if you will, or as in the Tao, first there was the one thing and then there was many things, so to speak. And I thought, okay, so this thought comes out as 0 point, so to speak. Then we give it birth, or it's already been birthed based on an experience. So now we give it energy and life, so to speak. And this could be, as I mentioned earlier, in the realm of the negative thought about going to work. And I thought to myself, okay, now let's take a look at that thought and let's shift it just a little bit and say, I am now going to a brand new experience. Perhaps I've been here before, but it's completely different today than it ever has been. And I'm going to find all the opportunities that will help me grow and become nurturing to who I am and my purpose, so to speak. Now, just that simple shift, I started, thinking, well, this is interesting, so I'm going to apply it in my own way, but this is for the listeners out there. Take that in that moment, that thought that you have that you're giving all that energy to, and simply shift it and see what you experience then. You will be tremendously astounded at how quickly things change. And we're not talking about positive thinking. We're talking about just simply shifting energy that you're giving one thought into a different thought all entirely. You will see a different set of circumstances. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely brilliant, Daniel. And you brought up something that is very, very important, because when you said it's not positive thinking, when you're looking from a quantum world view, one of the basics of it is that reality is not absolute. Now, some people, think of God or the divine or however they think of that principle, creator principle, as absolute. So I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about for the ordinary, everyday human being, you and me, that because we're living in a live conscious universe of energy in flux that's shifting and changing all the time, it's not separate from us. We're totally interconnected with the energy, intelligence, and the energy informed by intelligence that derives from our thought, or in the form of intent, in the form of thought. So the important point that I'm making is that fundamentally there are no absolutes, because nothing is fixed and solid. So when it's not the truth, like in an absolute way, that my job's going to be great today,
right,
or I'm going to discover so many things about my purpose. It's not the truth that my job stinks today, and
right.
I wish I wasn't going. Now, neither of those are absolute truth. So when you're quantum thinking, we say this way: reality is context dependent, and an intent is consciously created is a context that you are generating that is going to shape the whole experience inwardly and therefore outwardly, since the outer circumstances always reflect our inner state. Or as you said, what we focus on expands. What we add energy to, we add mass to. That was Einstein, E equals mc squared. They're controvertible. So the more attention we put on something, the more energy we give to it, the more mass, the more solid it seems to us. So the more you stay in those debilitating thoughts, oh God, my job, I wish I could stay in bed today, the more you're going to get an experience that matches up, because the universe will deliver. It's an intelligent universe. So you brought up a very important point about it not being positive thinking. Positive thinking is the opposite of negative thinking. So what happens in positive thinking, and affirmations are great, a lot of people do them, as you know. It's always good to have a positive thought. But if you have a positive thought on top of a negative thought or belief that you're holding as the absolute way that it is, then nothing happens. That's why people say, well, I created my intent, but I didn't get the results I want.
Right.
Right? That's usually why. Because you're holding something as absolute. And, oftentimes we have this about each other, right?
Right.
You have a thought about your wife or your husband or your mother or your daughter, whatever it is, your boss, and you're sure that's the way my boss is. He's a jerk. And when we work with clients, we remind them they are holding that reality in place just by continuously, as you say, focusing that thought and giving that thought energy. And it's not the truth that that person is a jerk. We're in an infinite possibility. Every one of us has the potential to demonstrate any human trait. So what is it that's going to manifest? And, this goes back to like the old Pollyanna thing. It's like there have been experiments done. Columbia University years ago with teachers. They brought into a classroom of what, in statistically, these were the underachieving students. But they brought in the teachers and they said, this is the gifted class. And guess what happens? The students rise to the occasion because the teacher is interacting with them as if they're gifted. So this is how we are literally interconnected, is that my intent for you, Daniel, as a great, brilliant, aware, high consciousness being with the best of intent, just me holding that without me even saying it, although I just said it, I can create that intent for you, for our relational field. And that is what's going to get manifest. And this we see, relational creations. People say, oh, well, I wanted $1 million, but it didn't happen, so therefore thought can't create. Because you have to look multidimensionally. And in the relational field, you can affect an instantaneous shift, an instantaneous result, because that's still in the energetic, subtle energy field where we are relating. It's through the field. It's not a physical field. Whereas by the time something becomes physical, it's slow-moving, more dense energy. That's what we relate to perceptually as physical objects, or as I say, money, houses, and cars. So when you want to create there, that takes a little longer, not necessarily. Infinite possibility universe, but that tends to take longer. So it's not like you have a thought and, the $1 million shows up in your bank account the next day. It doesn't work that way. But in relationships, it certainly does. When you realize your thought is not the truth and you can create an intent for your relationship with that person to see them in a whole new way, that shifts instantly.
Diane, I think you bring up marvelous two ways that people can actually apply what we're talking about here, and that's A, in money, and B, in relationships. If there was ever two things that can really bring people's stuff up, those would be it. What's really interesting is that in your book, Do You Quantum Think, you don't even address the subject of money until the very end. It's hardly something you really bring up in the book, which I want to applaud you, because I think a lot of people go that direction looking for books that will tell them, we will change your financial prosperity. Here's the 10 secrets how that nobody else on the planet seems to know about. And they go through the process, and they find themselves perhaps 2 years from the day they picked up this book or attended that particular seminar or workshop, no further along than they were when they started. And really, it's quite interesting when you approach it from a quantum thinking level. Again, as we discussed earlier, you have a thought, you give it energy, so therefore you're keeping its reality, basically right in front of you. So let's take a look at, for instance, the relationship thing can be instantaneous. That I agree with. But With the money side of things, people say to themselves, I would like to see myself earning, let's say, $10,000 a month starting in March of 2012. March of 2012 goes by, and the next thing you know, they're accumulating more debt without even doing anything really different. They're scratching their head saying, well, how did this happen? I thought I was going the other direction. But the thing is, when a bill comes along, or when that mishappenstance where it causes you to have a small debt, whatever the case is, take a look at what you start saying to yourself. Why does this always happen to me? Every time I think I'm getting ahead, then something tragic comes along and sets me back. I just don't see this ever happening for me.
That's exactly it. And that's what you're holding. Now, I'm glad we're laughing at this. But, this is exactly why it's not working, because when you realize how the faculties of mind work, and one of them is the principle of resonance, and this is what you're referring to. So what I like to think of it as, I use that, if you think of ourselves as a 1,000-stringed instrument, right? Resonating. And we're going to attract what resonates with us. It's a range of resonance. Just like if you have a tuning fork and you hit the tuning fork and it will set off what resonates with it, even though it's not physically connected to it or has no kind of linear connectivity whatsoever. It's in the same resonant range. So it's this way. I like to think of the 1,000-stringed instrument because we could have many good thoughts about ourselves that we're resonating, that, we deserve, which we all do, of course, we deserve to have wealth. We are careful with money. We know how to make money. We're, and all the good thoughts that you may have around things that have to do with money and your relationship with money, which is really what this is all about. It's our how we are related to the subject called money. And this is what I talk about at the end, as you say, in Chapter 22. But so when we're looking at, you can then have these other 100 strings that come up because they have been, these least action pathway, the other strings that you said, something doesn't go exactly according to plan, and you think, oh, my God, am I ever going to make it? Am I ever going to get out of debt? The economy is terrible. Now I really don't have a chance. And all those things are those other 100 strings that are keeping the harmonic out, in a cacophony, out of harmony with what you really want. And so this is where, with money especially, and I know because I've done this with myself, I want to just say that in my book, I cannot write or, talk about anything that I haven't experienced. And I know that if you have studied any kind of, with any spiritual master, they'll always tell you the same thing. You can't, this is about living the wisdom, not just knowing it or teaching it. So for me, I've taken myself in these different resonant fields around money, where, and I can see the difference where I've made a lot, and then, it'll drop, and I have to examine what am I resonating, because there is so much in the surrounding societal field. Now, my friend and mentor, who's Dr. Fred Allen Wolfe, he wrote the foreword for my book. Thank you, Fred. And he's really a genius thinker on the planet and has written 14 or 15 books. A lot of people know him from the movie What's the Belief Do We Know and from The Secret. And he talks about mind this way. He says that the way that we typically relate to ourselves, right, from the old world, physical worldview, physically based worldview, is that we're a body with a mind inside. But really, we're a body within a big mind, you know? So like this one universal mind, the intelligence of the universe, that we are connecting into. Something like I like to use the internet. You know, you can be always connected online, but what are you connecting into? This vast infinity, right, of information, the good, the bad, the ugly, and sublime of humanity, that it depends on what you plug into. So it's the same thing when you're talking about a personal resonant field. And what I feel where people get really a little bit stuck is that until we make the distinction that I'm making now, which is that we're surrounded by a society that is flooding us with messages around money and our relationship to money that are not really, let's say, good for our financial health for the most part, right?
Right.
I mean, you know, you watched it, you know, all the things going on in the United States Congress right now, you know, and they're talking about class wars and the poor, you know, they keep division, they divide the poor, the middle, the rich, and blah, blah, blah. And plus the fact that it's all around, you know, save, 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 bargain, you know, never pay the full price. And, you know, I have that joke, right? I say, if you think you're not, you know, also automatically thinking, I have that in my book, then why do you like $3.95 better than $4? You know,
right.
That's a cultural, societal least action pathway, right? Is it because you're saving a nickel? So we're very
Well, here's the big one, Diane, if you don't mind my interrupting. My father had retired, and, you know, my parents are just the type, they like to, you know, stay active, so he decided to take on a job where he was pumping gas at a gas station, and, you know, he loves doing that. He says, after 30 years of managing employees and customers, I love not having to think. But anyway, here was the thing is that they apparently at this particular place, which is a, you know, a store with a gas station, you know, one of those big prominent department stores sort of chains, and apparently they were giving a 3 or 5 cents a gallon discount if you bought their rewards card. And he says he was so astounded by people asking if they had given them that 5 cents a gallon discount. He just left them scratching his head like, 5 cents, you're paying $2.95 a gallon. How much of a difference do you think that's really going to make?
Right.
But according to a lot of people, it made a difference.
Well, that's a different context than what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not saying you shouldn't save the nickel, okay, and over time and in, you know, especially in today's gasoline economy, it would definitely make a difference. But what I'm talking about is just the cultural least action pathways in the society around money that, well, even we just kind of stepped into one there in this very conversation. And I went into it with you because maybe, you know, if you were thinking from infinite possibility and you around money, and you were thinking about, you know, obviously you want to be prudent and manage the money wisely, but are you going to be run by that, you know, like reduce, reduce, reduce? We worked in a lot of major corporations over the past 15 years, and I've seen where they have, you know, in various divisions of these companies, where when they get into a strictly cost-cutting mode, that it's doomed. It doomed them in certain ways.
Right.
And they have to bring themselves back. So this is why I'm saying you have to think multidimensionally. Yes, you want to use your money wisely, and if someone offers you a discount, sure, you know, why not? But I've seen people and companies, as I'm saying, be run by that, where rather than a company that I was advising years ago, it's a company you would know, a particular marketing vice president in this company, and they were into this, very highly competitive field where they just kept reducing the price. And what I was bringing up to him is, what about looking at really distinguishing yourself? Now, this is a more popular idea in today's world because of the clutter and the increasing complexity. But differentiating yourself, we can look at this personally too, and really becoming distinctive, like you have, Daniel, in Beyond 50. That's a very great differentiation you've made with so many radio shows and hosts out there. So when I advise them, why not look at what, I didn't use the word resonant field, but what is your resonant field? What are people going to come to you for? What are customers going to come to you for? What is the natural attraction, the unique talent, gift, service, brand that you have, that you are? And focus on that. And in terms of money, instead of just cut, how can we increase? How do we generate increase and the flow so that we are not stuck in the reductionistic? By the way, that is a word, reductionistic. That's one of the characteristics of the old world view thinking mentality. The industrial age, they called it a reductionistic universe. If you could reduce, look at an object, reduce it to the sum of its parts, figure out what they're made of and how it all works, we could predict and control the whole universe. But you see, when you go into this reductionistic thinking around money, you can really diminish. So money is an area, as you say, where we have the most charge on it, no pun intended, the most reactivity, the greatest amount of societal, cultural, least action pathways that are so embedded in us that in many ways we would not choose those thoughts. So the greater that you can become in the heightening, the awakening, I call it quantum thinking, awakened thinking. What does it mean? Awaken beyond the automatic conditioning. And I wanted to go back to what you were talking about in your own experience of the 0-point field.
Right.
Because when you're and so, the point I'm making around money is this is an area where we really need to be very attentive to the automatic conditioning so that we can break up the cement, that foundation that is no longer serving us with regard to our own personal relationship with money and what it represents, and start to create how we want to relate to money. Make sense?
It absolutely makes sense.
And so how do we do this? How do we create anything? And an aspect of creating is what you brought up, Daniel, about, the term in science is the 0-point field. The term that I adapt it as a quantum distinction is 0-point state. Our own state, because in science, the 0-point energy is where the energy comes almost to a rest, as science says. There's always some fluctuation in the universe. Nothing is ever still or static, but it comes almost to a resting point. So again, quantum think is not about science. It's about how the discoveries of science shape the way we think. So when we're quantum thinking, we're actually conditioning ourselves anew to expand beyond the old world, one-dimensional, fixed and static way. And so when we look at the 0-point state, what is the best state to be in for creating? Well, if you look at the fact that when we create, we're actually making these quantum connections, right? Connecting through the field. Like you connected to me, I connected to you through the quantum field. And what happens is it's like a radio. When we are clear of the static on the radio of our own being, all these thoughts, these negative thoughts, these doubts, these fears, these least action pathways that are surrounding us in the culture that we wouldn't pick if we want, if we were a choice, and we can be when we recognize them as such. Then what happens is when you're heightening your awareness, and this happens, I know, to people because I get letters about it every day, when they read my book, Do You Quantum Think? It happens naturally. It will happen because that is my intent in writing it, is that you connect to your own awareness in such a way that you can get this kind of clear state. And it's in that clear state that the greatest connectivity happens. So that when we create an intent, what is intent? It's putting our creative attention and energy on something. So it's a way, creating a probability wave. It's not an end result. I make a distinction between intent and intention. Intention being an end result we want. Intent being an activating of the energy field that we're operating in, so that you're setting off any number of results that will come to you consistent with your intent. And it works more effectively the more that you can put yourself into that 0 point state. And we do that in many ways. We do that in a formal practice of meditation, right, which many people have. We do that when we're completely focused and concentrated on an activity, maybe in our job. We do that when we're, what I call one of the practices, listening with your whole being to another person, just being in one conversation with that. So in all these many different ways, we do it when that's why we love to go in nature, because it brings about that silent state. And that state is the best state to create from intent.
Couldn't have been better said even by the Dalai Lama, I would think. Now, Diane, I love that, too, when you talk about, there's so many ways we can talk about do you quantum think, and right now we have an hour, and that's actual linear time. But that's okay. Perhaps we can revisit this down the road, which I would be more than happy to do this, because, again, it's very exciting how you put together the book, Do You Quantum Think? The first thing I want to let the listeners know, what I appreciate about the book, is you didn't spend the first 4 chapters describing the history of quantum mechanics and physics and Isaac Newton and Descartes and all these other people. Yeah, they're sprinkled throughout the book, but you didn't waste a whole lot of time. It's like you really dove right in to what you really wanted the readers to have, and that is a context, if you will, and you talk about context versus content, which is a beautiful chapter by itself, but that you show them practically with the right tools, and the one that I had said earlier in the program, pay attention to your thought and then just shift its energy to something else, And it's amazing. It'll take a little bit of an exercise, but you'll begin to see it work, and pretty soon that becomes automatic, which is a heck of a lot better than a least action pathway, in my opinion.
Exactly. And that's it. I mean, and you know what? I love what you're saying, Daniel, and thank you for the comments, is that it really is that simple. This is what I call the art of distinguishing, a new worldview of learning, which is to bring something into your awareness in the present moment, in the moments it is occurring, in such a way that you alter your relationship to it. Because there are circumstances in life, no question about it. There always will be. So we may not be able to change the circumstances, at least not immediately. But what we can do is we can create a new relationship to it. And that's what you're talking about, is you're creating a new relationship with the thoughts that do not serve you. And I do it in the simple way by just calling it least action pathway. It has no meaning. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It's just, there's that automatic habit, as you're saying.
It's like playing one of Dick Clark's 20 years of rock and roll albums. It's the same songs over and over.
Right. Exactly.
You love them, but they're still the same songs.
It is like the same song, right? Like a song that you'd rather, move on to the 21st century. And I think, if I have a minute, I don't know how to say, just wanted to say something.
Sure.
That we're in a time right now, and I like to study as a part of my hobby, I call it energy systems, and, there's always, it's like different seasons, there's a different energy in different seasons. And right now we're in a season of literally creating a new relationship to the way we see ourselves, the way we relate with others, our relationships, the 4 pillars of life, I call it. Self, relationships, career, and home. And these are the 4 pillars. So especially starting with the self, that we now have the opportunity, and really a compelling opportunity, to not be stuck with whatever way we ever related to ourself in the past. We have the opportunity now to use the energy of this cycle and to create from nothing, from the 0 point state, how do I want to relate to myself going forward? How do I want others to relate to me? I want to relate to myself as someone, powerfully self-expressed, living my purpose. You said a few really good words before, Daniel. Whatever it is for you, committed to my family, in great relationship with others, and just start living from that kind of a consciously created context.
After all, what has the least action pathway gotten you?
Right, more of the same. More of the same. And it's so simple. It's really that simple when you have the awakened awareness in the moment. And that is the purpose of quantum thinking, it's multidimensional. It's to teach us the principles. It's to say, hey, this is what's going on in life. How do we master it? What is it about? How do we really create? What are the dynamics of creating for human beings? What are the principles? How do I integrate them? And make it fun. Make it easy. I didn't want to go into some big, heavy, intellectual, put me to sleep. In fact, my husband, Alan, who's my partner in business and in everything in life, Master Quantum Think Coach, I call him, he was my reader during the time I was writing this book, and it took me many years. And as I say, it chose me. I didn't wake up and say, hey, I'm going to create a new system of thinking called quantum think. It just kind of came. The more I became aware of myself and my purpose and what I was actually distinguishing, what I was doing, showing people a new worldview, literally, then it came. But Alan would read me from my manuscript as I was writing, and that's how I edited. And the reason I did that is when I would listen to it aloud, if I fell asleep, I'd realize, okay, edit that piece. And, truly. So this is what my purpose in the book is, really to be entertaining. I love entertainment. And I trust you're being entertained.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, what I wanted to point out again, there are 21 processes that people can follow to begin to get into the quantum think mode. And believe me, it's so completely worth doing because, for instance, you mentioned the movie What the Bleep, and we've actually had a guest or two who were involved directly with that movie, and I had challenged them, and it was funny, the challenges that I threw at them. They said, I kind of agreed with you, or like The Secret, there was a particular guest we had on, and, so many you sometimes just don't remember all the names, but he says, well, I agree with you about The Secret. I thought it focused way too much on money, but yet, the ideal behind it was fairly sound. But that being said, when you take a look at these 21 steps, one of the things that I started to try to wrap my mind around, and this is one for the listeners out there, is when you talk about the industrial or the old linear way of thinking, the mechanistic worldview, so to speak, that things are separate, that you study them versus how effective is the whole, to now a quantum world where it's more of the whole and beyond, then you move from an either-or way of thinking. Now, this is the thing to wrap yourselves around here, listeners, to an and both world. And I started catching myself a lot more frequently. You either do this or this is going to happen. I thought, now wait a minute. Now how do I get to the and both thing here?
Right, the both and. But I like that you say it and both. But it's moving to a both and world.
Right.
And you can see this. Now this is so great because this is what people do. Well, I like The Secret, but it was too much about money. Well, everybody's interested in money, so what? So
yeah, really.
Money, and it's the principle of creation, and it's all these ways that different scientists and thinkers, talked about it. Okay, it's good. Take what you like from it. But you can see how the mechanism is so strong in our everyday lives, and particularly in our institutions. When you look at the institutions, the education institution, the political, government, judicial system, you're either guilty or you're not. Mm-hmm. There's nothing in between. It's all based in either or thinking. You're conservative or you're liberal, and variations on those themes. So you can see why right now we're stuck. And I like that you personalize it for people, because if you can catch your either or, and I love that you're doing the practices. That is so good, because you're
they're fun.
Thinking. I mean, really, because the point of it is, a lot of the things that are out, and I think one of the beauties, if I do say so, I'm grateful that I'm the vehicle that quantum thing, came through me. Mm-hmm. Hi, you're it. You're going to do this. And so I said, okay. And one of the things what I love about it is that it's a literal quantum leap in consciousness. So, I always use the example. You're on the Earth. You're looking out at, the sun, the moon, the stars from this self-centered. Now imagine that you're out there looking back at the Earth, something like the astronauts do. That is a quantum leap in consciousness. So we do it all the time, every time our thought flips from this to that to that to that. Now, what quantum think as a system of thinking, and we don't even realize until we make this distinction that it's a whole system, that you literally take this leap from the old world whole system to the more expanded, more accurate whole system, the quantum view, then you're thinking from a whole new perspective. So what happens for you, Daniel, that you have named a few examples in your own life, is all of a sudden you'll be going through your day and you'll realize, oh, why do I have to pick between this way or that way? Let's see how we can have it all, literally.
Right.
Let's see how we can have the both and world. And that's how you do it. Just like once you make the leap and you grasp the whole system as you have, then you're operating from that system. So you can still distinguish which worldview is shaping your thinking in any given moment. So it's not like, as I say, you're not going to, monitor your thoughts one at a time. I don't think so. The agony of it, not to mention the impossibility of it. But when you think of it as a whole system and you make that leap, it's so much fun because then you're in a new state of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot see the pathway there. That's what a quantum leap is. The definition of a quantum leap is a change in the state of the energy without a traceable pathway as to how it jumped from that state to that state. So we can do that. You literally jump systems, you jump states, and all of a sudden you're in that awareness all the time. Now, for you, Daniel, I imagine it's always there. It doesn't go away anymore, right?
No, it actually has a very permanent hold. I think it's because it really gives the mind something to do, and just as brief as I can here, as we're running a little bit out of linear time, is, for instance, that I'm trying to think of how I was going to phrase this. Okay, so you were saying that it's there, okay, that it sets itself, it becomes permanent. Okay, here's what it was. During the course of this summer, as I was reading this book, and there were others that I was reading as well, it kind of like was all starting to come together for me, is that I came across something that says the mind does one of two things. It almost becomes a paradox, okay? The mind does, the first thing is it wants to conserve as much energy as possible because it has a lot of body systems that it operates, okay? Mm-hmm. But then the second thing is the mind wants to learn new things. Now, the funny thing about that is when you begin to learn new things, that you can feel even a physical resistance to it because the mind's finally saying, wait a minute, are you expecting me to wake up and engage in this? So you can see how the least action pathways will come at you in onslaughts just simply by the sheer physical fact that the mind would rather just go about conserving energy.
That's a very, very interesting paradox. I love that. And, it brings up that you, it's like this. The distinction, holistic and holographic, which is really the number one distinction in the system, that we're in a universe of whole systems. And so in brain science, for example, they say when you introduce something new into the brain, right, a new connection, mm-hmm. What happens is it's a whole system shift. This is what it's meant by the holographic brain, which Carl Pribram research talked about, wrote about. And this, if you think of this in terms of what you're talking about, when you introduce something new, it does require a kind of an interruption, right? Mm-hmm. In that, in this case, helpful. By the way, least action pathways aren't bad. Many of them, we couldn't survive without them physiologically. Mm-hmm. And when we type or play a musical instrument, and it's a least action pathway that's serving us. So we're just talking about interrupting the ones that are not giving us the results we want. But if you've got a great least action pathway, hey, all for it. So when you have that physiologic, that mind-body connection that you just mentioned, it's kind of a physiological, right, conservation of energy. That's one of the laws of physics, I know, that of classical physics. Then in a moment, if you can interrupt it, introduce something new, and the whole system will change. Mm-hmm. And this is true when you introduce a new principle, a new distinction, something new into your life that you've always wanted to try, but you just didn't because of that old, right?
Right.
Conservation of energy or inertia, whatever it was. But once you become aware of it, as you just distinguished that for everyone, then you have choice. If you're not aware of it, we can become a victim of our own least action pathways. So it's all about awakening awareness. That's the fun. That's the fun of it.
It certainly is. The book is Do You Quantum Think? And our wonderful guest today, Diane Collins. Diane, for our listeners, give out your website again one more time.
The website is www.Diane, with two N's, Dianne, Collins, COLLINS.com, and be sure to look at the Ultimate Study Group because it's a way to connect with other quantum thinkers. I'd love to have you there, Daniel, by the way, because if you sign up for it, even if you could never come, because we've got people from all over the world, I send the replays immediately after. It's twice monthly, first and third Mondays. So even if you can't be there physically on the calls, you'll still get the benefit. And it's all for people reading the book. So thank you for letting me say that and invite people. And thank you so much for having me, Daniel. Totally enjoyed the conversation.
And it's been a very good pleasure to have you on the program as well so we can get our people quantum thinking and moving forward. Again, thank you for being on the program. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. This is Beyond 50. Be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter. We thank you again for joining us, and remember, live your day past